Well, all right. It's not all step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and so on. I guess it started when I was maybe in my junior year or my senior year in high school. Kerwin High School is a Catholic school that was run by the Christian Brothers, and I was there for 4 years. And in probably my senior year, after my senior year and graduation, then I had 2 years in which I went to worked for the Santa Fe Railroad. We didn't have the money in those years to go to college. So after high school, I had to do something, and I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I think it was that far back that I began feeling called from God, and I kind of run away from it. My father, your grandfather, or maybe great-grandfather, was a super accountant, and by that I mean there were a lot of accountants, but you have a master of a division of those areas. And so, yes, he was. And I went to work in the same area just because it was a job open. I wanted to, do something. I had to start working somewhere, doing something. So I went to work for the Santa Fe Railroad, and I worked there for a total of 2 years. I realized that I didn't want to do that the rest of my life. I'm going to find a way to go to college. And I did. And that was simply by... I don't know why I chose St. Edward's University. I guess maybe I figured I wanted a Catholic college because, as I indicated, I had been listening to God but running away from God. I knew this was going to cost me something if I started listening to and following God's call. You do that at a price. And so I went through that, and then I went off to college at St. Edward's University. And I went off with the idea that I had also been thinking about law, about going into the legal profession. Finally gave up the job at the Santa Fe Railroad and then went to St. Edward's University. I was still being plagued by the idea of a religious vocation, a religious calling somewhere in response to what I thought God was kind of bugging me about. And somewhere along the line, or maybe all the way along the line, I began picking up the idea that, listen, Barney, if God is calling you to do something, then you'd be a fool not to follow it. God doesn't call people to do stupid things. He calls you to do something because he wants something done, or he wants something done by you and your life. So that's my formulation of it now. I didn't maybe formulate it as clearly as I can now. That was pretty clear to me. I wasn't having so much fun on the railroad at all, nor did I think these things nearly as clearly as you have just enunciated, nor as I have enunciated. I'm able to do this, looking back on my life. I was struggling with myself, and I was struggling with other things and other people. I had a very fine lady friend. We were pretty close. So there was that thing, but that put me between, well, do I really want to pursue this to which I feel God maybe is calling me? Do I want to do something else? I want to go away and get an education for legal profession. And these are all good hindsight stuff. I think that as in the modern age, even now more than way back then, but even back then, if you're looking at what you're going to do with your life, then you want to say, well, I want to do some good things with my life. I want to make a living and may want to do it this way or that way. But you had to leave a vocation to religious life aside. You still got to make some decisions. Well, do you want to spend time and money going to college? Because that's a job, but it's got some advantageous results that you won't have if you don't do it. I had thought about the legal profession even when I was in late year or so in high school. Then as I graduated and went to work, then it became more of an ambition. By then it was, well, do I want a college and, are you going to make more money and be more important in a calling in the world, or don't you? if you don't go to college, all you're going to have is your high school education. You won't have any profession to pursue. He just, he grew up as a coal miner as a kid in Pennsylvania, but he was appreciative of education, and he encouraged education. Well, I had been struggling with, religious calling for 3 years about. I felt that I had been pulled that way by God, and that I had been listening but resisting. It was a combination of following or not following, but that's like anything else. Well, once I entered the Jesuits, that was when my, advanced education began. I think I wanted to get away from some of the close friends that I had developed and couldn't pursue any further as long as I was going to choose a religious life. I wanted to get away from the environment that I had been struggling with. I don't want to put a lot of stuff on that.
Yeah, I understand. Any regrets on that part of it?
No, not ultimately, of course, because I stuck with religious thing for the rest of my life. I think your dad was a wonderful man and did it. He and I were very good friends, and he was, I thought, led a wonderful life. And once I entered the Jesuits, then I had 2 years of novitiate and then 3 years of philosophy studies, and I got a degree in philosophy, which I don't think appears in all that stuff. But then I taught high school for 3 years up in Wisconsin. Wonderful school. It was a boarding school, and it was a very fine place. See, and then I went back and after that and studied 4 years of theology. So I had 3 years of philosophy before I taught, 3 years of high school at Campion in Wisconsin, and then 4 years of theology. My superiors wanted me, all during those years when I was studying philosophy and theology in the seminary, one of my superiors said, we want you to go into sociology. Sociology was becoming a very prominent thing back in those years, and so they had me slated to go into sociology. So after I finished my theology stuff, I had to take as a Jesuit, seminarian. And then after I finished that, I was prepared to then study when my seminary stuff was over, my provincial came to me and said, well, Barney, I can see that they've been preparing you to go into social work. And I said to him, no, Father, you mean in sociology? And he said, he was a nice guy. He said, no, Brother Bernard, I mean into social work. And I said, well, I don't know much about social work. He said, well, that's what we want you to learn. After you finish your theology, then we want you to go and take a PhD in sociology. You take a vow of obedience. I signed up for it, and so that's fine. I said, okay, if you want me to do that, I'll do it. But, that's part of your vow of obedience. The superiors of the society in the Missouri province realized that they had a school of social work at St. Louis. The guy who had been running it, he did a good job, but he was getting well on in years, and that they were going to need a new director. Mm. And so they said, well, we don't even have a Jesuit yet who is in that field. So they shifted me from sociology to social work, and that's why I went off to USC in Southern California and was there for 2 years and got a master's degree in social work. And then after I had my master's degree, then I moved to Brandeis and got a PhD in social work, or there it was called social welfare and social welfare administration. And it's a field that has been developing for years, and it's splintered off into social work, clinical stuff, and social welfare, administering the welfare institutions in the country. I went to USC. That was all my choice. I ended up down at 2 years at USC to do a master's degree. After I went from USC to Brandeis. I got to be good friends with the dean at Brandeis, who had worked for the federal government in their welfare programs for quite a few years. He and I got along very well together. After my first year at Brandeis, I was just in there talking to him. He says, "What are you going to do during the summer?" I says, "Oh, I don't know." I said, "I'll probably go back and take a couple of courses and so on at St. Louis University." He says, "Why don't you go overseas? Why don't you go abroad?" I said, "What do you mean?" Well, he says, he said, "Would you like to travel?" And I said, "Well, you have in mind." And he picked up the phone right when I was in his office talking with him, and he brought up the subject, and he got on the phone and he called the lady that had taken his job when he left the government, the federal government. He picked up the phone and called her. After about a 10-minute conversation with her, he was thinking of me. Well, he said, "How would you like to go to Guatemala this summer?" Well, hell, I didn't know where Guatemala was. But I said, I knew it was down in Central or South America. And he said, why don't you go down to, would you like to go to Guatemala? I said, well, yeah, that'd be okay, I guess. So then he gave me some information on Guatemala and the problems that they have in Guatemala and so on. So I went to Guatemala for the summer, lived in a Guatemalan home. I picked up, as a result of that travel that got me, and I went back in subsequent summers went to Chile and went to Guatemala, went to Peru and so on. And those were, very good experiences that just kind of came along with what was happening with me, during those years of studying sociology or social work. But then when that was all over, finally got my PhD from Brandeis back to St. Louis University and spent 10 years teaching in their social work program first, and then in directing the social work program. Yeah, I taught during the years I was at St. Louis U. I was teaching in the graduate program. 10 years at St. Louis U. I was approached by the chairman of the board of trustees of Gonzaga University, saying, "Why don't you come out and be our president?"